How Halbrand, being Sauron, changes the dynamics of the Rings of Power. Hi, I'm Simon Candlish and welcome to Marvelous Videos. It is funny how a good old-fashioned plot twist can give people a whole new perspective, and with Halbrand being revealed as Sauron in the season finale of the Rings of Power, there have been mixed responses from the fans. While many actually put their money on Halbrand for many subtle clues in the previous episodes, others simply cannot seem to comprehend how it all adds up. In this video, we will look into all the indications that pointed to him being the most likely candidate as the Dark Lord, and the implications it will have on the show going ahead. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you, and let's begin. How the final episode shaped things. Before we go into the whole Halbrand being Sauron saga, let us first take you through a brief recap of the episode. It starts off with the stranger being stalked by the three mystics, and they reveal themselves to be servants of Sauron. They claim that the stranger is none other than Sauron himself, and his memory has simply been clouded. But they soon find out that they have mistaken Sauron's identity when the stranger uses his wizardly power to banish them after a pep talk from the brave Harfoot Nori. Meanwhile, a wounded Halbrand barely makes it to Elfland alongside Galadriel, but the treatment works wonders and he heals pretty quickly. He goes on to impress Celebrimbor with his flattery and crafting skills, and he even offers a few suggestions to amplify the quality and power of the special element Mithril. At this point, our suspicions are all but confirmed. There are far too many hints pointing to Halbrand being Sauron. Shortly after, Galadriel confronts Halbrand after finding documents that suggest that the last king of the Southlands died a long time ago without an heir. She demands to know his true identity, and Halbrand calmly states that he never really claimed to be the king of the Southlands. He reveals that he has been existing since the beginning of the First Silence, and he also talks about having several names over the ages. At this point, Galadriel knows that her arch-nemesis is right before her, and she tries to stab him, but in vain. Halbrand stops her dagger and throws her down into the memories in Valinor. Later, Halbrand, or should we say Sauron now, tells Galadriel all about how Morgoth's defeat released him and enabled him to feel the light of the One. Eru Iluvatar. This form of Sauron seems to be representing his past, although it could all be a part of his trickery to get Galadriel to join him. He offers to rule the world alongside Galadriel, and although she denies any assistance in his quest, Sauron makes it clear that without him, the elves would simply disappear into extinction. The next scene shows that Sauron has vanished, and Galadriel is probably hesitant to reveal Halbrand's real identity because she is the one who brought him there. The stranger is shown to be heading on his own adventure with Nori, and the final scenes reveal the much-awaited Rings of Power, the 311 rings forged from the methods advised by Sauron. The season ends with a creepy sight of Sauron looking over the landscape, with probable indications that he's about to unleash the true extent of his powers pretty soon. How Halbrand being Sauron fits the jigsaw puzzle perfectly. Sauron's identity was purposely kept a secret so that the viewers would be on the edge of their seats, guessing the possibilities. We all knew that he was out there somewhere, hiding in plain sight, and this meant that every mysterious new character introduced in the show led to a heated debate about him being Sauron. For the longest time, viewers were wondering if it was the stranger amongst the Harfoots, or if it was Adar, the father of the orcs, and finally, it has been answered. The most probable candidate for Sauron, the one who seemed like the most to be the Dark Lord, proved the speculations right. Now that we know Halbrand is Sauron, a lot of things actually make sense. Let us take a look at the subtle hints dropped from the very first episode that indicated Halbrand was Sauron all along. Right from the word go, the showrunners did enough to suggest that Halbrand could be the Dark Lord, even though there was no concrete evidence until the season finale. Now, it might be a fun time to observe all those instances that give us the idea so many times during the season. If you remember the scene that introduced Halbrand, he is seen on a raft along with a few other survivors. They find Galadriel in a near-death situation, trying to swim to shore, and they help her on board, even though some members are hesitant. moment. Halbrand makes a remark that appearances can be deceiving. One of the first hints that he was deceiving everyone with his whole human getup. When the raft is attacked by a mysterious underwater creature, he is quick to sacrifice the lives of other members on board to save himself. However, he was quick to save Galadriel because the elf warrior was his key to finding his way back to Middle-earth. He came across as a man trying to get away from his past and making an effort to start a new life, but now that we know his real identity, things suddenly have a darker implication. It seems like Sauron was calculating each step carefully, and he knew exactly how to gain back his position by siding with the right characters at the right time. Later, when they were rescued from the sea by the Númenóreans, he kept up with his charade and continued to fool everyone around him. Another major hint was also dropped by the showrunners during his brief stint in Númenor. His fascination with the blacksmith and his desperation to forge something brought back memories of Sauron, who was a master craftsman himself. He was probably trying to find his way to forge the Rings of Power, and this is probably what got him so interested in the job. During a brief scuffle with a few Númenóreans, we see his insane powers when he takes down several men without breaking a sweat. Even when Galadriel figured out that he was the ruler of the Southlands in exile, he kept refuting her claim in a manner that made her more convinced that he was simply trying to get away from the cursed lands taken over by the orcs. As it turns out, Adar actually succeeded in ousting Sauron after he realized that the Dark Lords were simply sacrificing his orc children for their own cause. Sauron alone didn't have the power to go back and face Adar, but with a formidable force by his side, he had the perfect ally to take back what was once his. Halbrand was always hesitant about going away from Númenor, and those who are familiar with Tolkien's lore will know why. Finally, he did agree to go alongside Galadriel and the Númenor forces only because he knew that his success required him to stay close to Galadriel. A majority of the orc forces were wiped out in the battle that ensued, and it certainly made things a lot easier for him. Also, if you look back and observe his interactions with Adar, you will find an extreme rage inside Halbrand that almost prompted him to kill Adar when they first met in battle. The anger is justified if you consider how Adar actually got the better of him previously. Later, the manner in which Adar asked about his real identity also raises a few eyebrows among those who suspected Halbrand to be the Dark Lord. There were times in the show when Halbrand openly admitted to doing terrible things in the past, things so terrible the people of the Southlands would renounce him as their king if they found out. If only Galadriel took his words seriously. Some typical characteristics of Sauron were noticeable in Halbrand from the very beginning, and we're not just talking about his forging skills. Sauron is described by Tolkien as a charming manipulator, and Halbrand was exactly that during his entire screen presence. He not only manipulated Galadriel into trusting him, but he went on to earn the trust of the Númenóreans and even Celebrimbor. He resorts to flattery when required, and he is nonchalant when the situation demands. In simple words, a trickster who knows how to have his way. In the final episode, he even tries to get Galadriel by his side, a ploy that fails, but shows just how much he can try to manipulate everyone around him. The final nail in the coffin would have to be the final episode. Even before he revealed his actual identity, he was mortally wounded and he recovered almost miraculously and found a way to appease Celebrimbor. Of course, he had identified the man who could suit him the most and create the Rings of Power, and his expertise even surprised the famed elf craftsman. By now, most of the viewers were almost certain that Halbrand is none other than Sauron, and the revelation was just a formality.
I'm Halbrand. What's her heading?
When did Halbrand, aka Sauron, begin his journey? The show started him off on a mysterious note, and the narrative did not provide clear answers as to where he was coming from. His first appearance was one that showed him vulnerable and trying to escape something, and we can only assume that the threat was from Adar and his orc forces. Adar had rebelled against Sauron after the fall of Morgoth, and Adar was opposed to the idea of the Dark Lord using his orc children as sacrificial and experimental subjects. It can be assumed that he assumed the human form of Halbrand after the destruction of his physical form, and the master shapeshifter chose his guise wisely to blend in with those escaping. He probably laid low, hiding in Rhûn, and this would also explain why Galadriel never found him him during her quest for all those years. Seizing the Southland's crest from the last known dead king was a masterstroke because for the longest time it continued to confuse Galadriel and led her into thinking that he was the rightful king of the Southlands.
And you will die because of me!
Was Sauron as Halbrand truly powerful? This is highly debatable because we have seen both sides of the Halbrand in terms of his powers. Firstly, when he is seen on the raft, he seems quite vulnerable and worried about an underwater creature that wouldn't have concerned Sauron under normal circumstances. He was shown as someone powerful enough to take on multiple Númenóreans in a fight, but he was also mortally wounded during the explosions in Mount Doom. Lastly, when Galadriel tries to stab him after learning his real identity, he is powerful enough to stop her effortlessly. Remember here that she is one of the finest warriors that we've seen on the show so far. Hence, it is tough to say if he was faking his vulnerability or if it was truly below his usual strength. It could be a possibility that he was not at full strength initially but gained his powers back over time. The fact that he could make Galadriel fall into an illusion as well proves that his powers are not just physical, and the dark powers are either finding him again or have been there the whole time.
I have had many names.
Was Halbrand Sauron all along? This might seem a bit outrageous, but we would request you to hear us out. What if Halbrand really was a mortal man all along? In that case, Sauron was released after the eruption of Mount Doom, and the Master Shapeshifter probably just assumed the form of Halbrand to blend in. The mortal Halbrand probably died in that explosion, and if you are going by this faint possibility, then it does explain some of the nicer things that Halbrand did before, which you wouldn't expect from the evil lord. While this might sound like a clever twist in the story, we must admit that the possibility is extremely unlikely, because the showrunners constantly kept dropping hints throughout the series like we discussed before. That being said, this certainly would have been a pretty cool scenario, something that would have stirred up the beginning of Season 2. Is this version of Sauron evil? This might sound like an amusing subheading, especially because Sauron is regarded in Tolkien's lore as one of the evilest entities after Morgoth. However, things are not always black and white, especially in a show that claims to reinterpret and read between the lines for many aspects of the lore. Tolkien did mention that nothing is evil in the beginning, and it happens to be one of the first lines of the show. Sauron was only corrupted by Morgoth and did not start off as the evil Dark Lord. That being said, the Sauron that we see in Halbrand is a long time after Morgoth's reign, so technically he has already been corrupted. However, if you observe all his actions in the course of the narrative so far, he is not essentially a conventionally evil entity. Yes, he is selfish and prioritizes survival than the well-being of others. He is manipulative and works on his own accord, but he never really does something so despicable that makes you hate his guts. Is that the beginning of a grey character, a version of Sauron that is simply too complex to be deciphered in the binary verdict of good or bad? Halbrand or Sauron, as we've seen so far, seems to be running away from conflict and largely wants to be left alone. He is more concerned about his survival than waging war, and his interactions with Galadriel have been far from hostile. In fact, even when he reveals himself as Sauron, he initially extends a proposal for Galadriel where he wants a reign of peace with the elf warrior by his side. Again, the episode ends with him in the traditional black cape walking into Mordor, so the creators are still keeping us guessing on this one. The showrunners have already revealed that the first season was more of an origin story for Sauron, and the second season will actually announce his presence formally. Does the storyline of season 1 indicate that they will pull off a version of Sauron that viewers will sympathize with? While we have to wait and watch what happens next, it is clear that Sauron in the Rings of Power will not be a straightforward manifestation of evil that most fans are familiar with from Tolkien's lore. What lies ahead for Sauron? As we've said before, the Rings of Power does not follow a set pattern from Tolkien's lore. Thus, there is no telling for sure where the story is headed next. However, one thing is for certain, only 3 among the 19 Rings of Power are not going to be enough for Sauron to achieve his goals. There might just be another grand war brewing between the Elvish forces and Sauron, but we have to wait quite some time to learn more. As of now, the second season has only gone into production, and viewers might be in for a long wait to find out the answers. Overall, the first season of The Rings of Power had its moments, and revealing Halbrand as Sauron was probably one of the strongest story arcs of the show. If the creators can take the feedback from the fans and compensate for their shortcomings, we might be in for an even better second season, with Sauron's evil in full flow. Do let us know in the comments below about your thoughts on Halbrand being Sauron, and also tell us what you think about the plot going ahead. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks everyone.